difficult to illustrate how we did the mapping on the scale of the entire ward. So I'm going to show you a little zoom in. Let me show you how we did it. Let me zoom in on a little area, Queen West, to show you how we did it with the map. So to start off, we used the city property data maps as the basis for our mapping project. And there's two reasons for doing so. The first reason being that many of the public lanes have already been mapped on the property data maps. And the second reason is that Councillor Vaughan's office's previous mapping exercise with Ryerson used the property data maps for the basis of their neighborhood mapping exercise, upon which the results of our mapping will then be added onto the layer. So once we took the casements of those layers and figured out where they were roughly, we went out into Ward 20 and walked every single ward and had to look at the different criteria that would influence and characterize those lanes. So some of that criteria was lighting. There's this perception that lanes are these dark, dangerous places where a lot of crime exists. And some of the lanes, like the one pictured here, may indeed have a lack of light. But from the focus group and also from our mapping exercise, what we found was that there was an abundance of lighting, and beyond the abundance of lighting, the lighting was quite diffuse. So much so that you could easily read a book or look at a map from almost anywhere within the lanes within the ward. After lighting, we also took a look at some of the vegetation that was within the lanes. So we did this by having a look at the trees that would grow, some of the side vegetation that was there, and then also the parks that were given access to, by the lanes themselves. Lanes imply that they give access to and from land uses. There's sort of this perception that lanes primarily give access for cars. That's not the case in the ward. Here in the ward, we have a lot of lanes that service only pedestrians, but there are also many that provide access for mixed uses, such as cars and pedestrians, bicycles. The level of access within the lanes isn't complete. A lot of times there's blockages within the lanes that direct traffic to and from the lanes. Sometimes this comes about by deliberate fences, such as this one here in Alexander Park, or this improvised fence in Kensington Market. As I mentioned before, the lanes give access to and from particular land uses, and it's the land uses that really give the lanes their character and really define what the lanes are going to be used for. So the first sort of lanes that we looked at was the elephant in the room, laneway housing. And when we looked at the types of laneway housing in the lane, we found a wide variety. Some of it overt, such as this laneway home in Cross Street. Some covert, such as this one in Seton Village. Some new, and some old. But lanes, they're not these like static, just like everything we see, they're not these static entities. What we noticed was there's a lot of construction that was happening on lanes, implying that there's change happening within the lanes. Beyond that, we also looked at employment lands that were being serviced by the lanes, mixed-use areas that were being supported by the lanes, and also institutional areas that were being supported by the lanes. When we started to map the lanes, what we noticed was that the way that the lanes pierce through the blocks and how they provide service to the land use that they do service was one of the defining features of how the lane functions. What was surprising was that some of the blocks have no lanes at all. Maybe one of the more well-known type of lane that we sort of imagine, these long longitudinal lanes. These are very legible, that provide a good amount of access, and sometimes are maybe a little bit redundant to the flanking streets on the sides. L lanes also provide a good amount of access, but they may not be as legible to pedestrians, particularly for people who are not from the area. There's also closed long lanes that provide a good amount of access, but again can be confusing for people who may be trying to use the lane as a route for walking through. The T-block, possibly one of the most legible forms of lanes, has a good amount of access from all flanks and is very well legible because you have very clean line sights. The irregular long lane, good amount of access, but maybe confusing once again because it doesn't have clear lines of sight. You can't see where you're going. The mini block, we find these in areas like Kensington Market or down in the King West area. And these blocks are typified by a large number of lanes that come together and meet in the center and then create sort of a mini community within them. There's also side lanes, small lanes that provide an added level of access to a main lane, such as a long lane or a medium lane. And then finally, multiple lanes. These are similar to mini blocks, but the lanes don't meet at the center. Sometimes they provide access towards a central use such as a parking lot, which you think would add a certain amount of connectivity, but sometimes it can convolute the flow of traffic. So where are the lanes, and how many are there? It was difficult to sort of tie down the exact number of lanes within the ward just because they're broken up across so many blocks. So in counting the lanes, we used a system based on a lane such as Sussex Mews, where connectivity was consistent or continuous through several blocks. And in doing so, we found approximately 164 individual lanes within the ward, which if you were to align them end to end, you would find that they add up to 28 kilometers. So what does that mean in terms of length? That would drive you 3/4 of the way across the city of Toronto, or 1.5 times around the ward itself. The lanes are found throughout the entire ward, except for in areas where the development broke away from the park lot division system, with the exception of the annex, which did divide by the park lot system, but because of the size of properties, they tended towards shared driveways as opposed to traditional lanes. Some of the areas which broke away from the traditional lane form was the University of Toronto, which because of its large development size tended towards larger access routes, or didn't have lanes at all, or tended towards pedestrian walkways as opposed to lanes themselves. Other areas like Alexander Park used to have lanes, but upon redevelopment, some of those lanes disappeared.